Florida gardeners, these squashes look wild. Something else that's crazy is these are typically a lot easier to grow than your traditional, yellow crookneck squash or your green zucchini that you find in Publix. But most of the time, I've found that it's better to grow an alternative variety, something that's a little bit better suited for like a tropical environment. I've been killing plants in Florida for about 10 years now, and I want to share with you 5 really cool looking varieties that you can grow in Florida. The first squash variety that we'll talk about is considered a winter squash. If you don't know the difference between winter and summer, don't worry. I'll talk about it in a minute. It's real easy. But like most of these, if harvested young, you can totally eat it as a summer squash. It's the largest of all the squash varieties that I'm going to talk about. These things can grow up to 100 pounds. Freaking massive. If you're really into squash art, or if you've never heard of it, check out these cool things that you can make out of squashes. It would be really good to make things like birdhouses, lamps and stuff, maybe some bowls. This squash is called the giant zucca gourd. We grew this last spring and got some decent sized squash off of it, but we still did have to battle powdery mildew. So it is resistant, but it doesn't mean immune. But if you're wanting to grow something huge, this is the squash for you. This next squash that looks crazy but also grows well here in Florida is a lot smaller than the last squash that we just talked about. Not only are the fruit smaller, but the plant itself is a lot smaller. So this squash is great for gardeners who are working with a smaller area to grow in. It has a really unique shape with these nice rounded edges. It's most often referred to as the patty pan squash. Sometimes I've heard it called the scalloped squash as well because of those unique edges. There are a few different varieties of patty pan squash that you can try growing here in Florida. They are the early white, Sunny Delight, and Peter Pan. These are great also because they mature pretty quickly, relatively fast in comparison to some of these other squash. In about 45 to 70 days from planting, you'll have some squash that you can eat. All right, let's go back to something that can grow really big, but in a different way. This squash won't get quite as heavy as the giant zucca gourd, but it's going to get long. Some people say it resembles a trombone, and that's why it got its name, but I mean, come on. We know what that looks like, right? It's probably just my immature brain. I'm a child. This squash is called the Tromboncino rampicante. I think that's how you say it. I'll put it on the screen so you know how to spell it. If you just let this puppy grow, it's going to get up to 3 feet long. This is a zucchini type squash, so you can eat it when it's young. It's got thin skin. Use it as like your traditional green zucchini replacement in any of your dishes. So it's a much more Florida-friendly variety of your traditional green zucchini. It's going to grow a lot easier and it's going to look way cooler in your garden. This next squash is another one that's got some unique curves to it. It comes in a bunch of different colors. You've got a yellow one, you got a green one, you got a pale green one, you got a pale orange, and it'll grow a few feet in length as well. So it's long and curvy. It kind of resembles a butternut squash, but with a lot more character to it. Its skin is a little bit more textured, and it takes a couple more twists and turns. It's kind of like butternut squash's brother that's maybe taken some illicit drugs or something like that. This squash is called the Tahitian squash. Some Florida gardeners even say that they found this easier to grow than the Seminole pumpkin, which is pretty wild considering the Seminole pumpkin used to just grow wild natively in Central Florida. The Tahitian squash is a native to like Central and South America, so it is definitely well suited for our tropical to subtropical climate here in Florida. And this last squash that we'll talk about is what I think is the coolest looking one out of all of them. It's believed to be native to Central America, so again, well suited for our subtropical environment. It has a big bulbous bottom and a nice curvy top. The skin can be yellow, green, or orange and have these really unique striping patterns. This squash is called the Cushaw squash. It can grow to be really thick, like 12 to 18 inches in diameter. And like many squash on this list, it can be either enjoyed as a winter squash if you let it really ripen on the vine, or if you pick it young when the skin is still really thin, you can use it a lot like a summer squash. So I mentioned earlier that I would talk about what the difference between winter and summer squash are, and maybe you've picked up on it through the little hints I've dropped throughout the video, but the names winter and summer refer to the season in which they are harvested. So winter squashes typically harvested later in the year. They're going to have a thicker, harder skin, whereas summer squashes typically a little bit more fast maturing. They're going to have a thinner skin. Another difference between the two is typically a winter squash will vine on something, whereas summer squash is going to be more bushy. But what I've definitely found is that you should trellis both of them. Squashes, again, are very susceptible to things like powdery mildew, and one thing that really helps combat that is airflow. So if we can get them up off the ground and get some air flowing around them, you're going to help reduce your chances of seeing powdery mildew. I have pretty much always battled powdery mildew when it comes to growing squash. Some things that I've tried in the past that have helped contain it a little bit, not eliminate it, but contain it, is a copper spray. Most recently, I've used like a water and hydrogen peroxide mix, and that's worked pretty decently. Again, you got to continue to apply it throughout the growing season. But something that I've seen other gardeners use that I'm kind of curious about is milk and water mixture. I've asked some gardeners that I trust, and they have said that they actually have really good luck with it. So I'm going to give that a go this year. If you want to see how our experience is with that, definitely give us a follow. I will for sure be documenting. Something else that I've found really helpful to growing squash in Florida is choosing the right variety or right family of squash. The family that I'm talking about is Cucurbitae moscato. Squashes in this family typically have a thicker vine, and that makes them a little bit more resistant to the squash borer bug. But if you're growing vegetables in Florida, I put together a 100% free guide, something that I really wish I had when I first started. It helps with choosing the right varieties, with specific planting times for each part of the state in Florida, because that's something else that we're a little bit unique in when you're comparing us to the rest of the United States. Helps with some layout things, but it's a really helpful tool. Like I said, it's 100% free. So yeah, if that's something that you think will be helpful, I'll put a link in the description. I really hope this helps, and have a good day. Thanks.